Hi, everyone. Mitch from sportschatplace.com and pickdogs.com. I got Steve Monahan and the Puck Dogs with me. We are a few days away from the NFL draft at this point. Got sim games going on, which, I mean, to me, it's a day. Every day with sim games is a bad thing. And
Let's start a riot.
well, because I could see the sim games being the thing that sticks. It's always the crappiest thing, that sticks. I could see the
Yeah.
sim games. People still saying, "Oh, we can still do sim games every day." It's like, oh, man. Hopefully, people will stop betting them at that point. It's our only hope.
It's the
But
only show in
I,
town.
I think I think people will stop betting sim games. I think the books will stop betting, doing the sim games.
Yeah.
so the cable guy did come right on time yesterday. Did as we continue to set up the studio. Probably I don't know, probably at least a week away from moving to the new studio at this point. It's definitely it all sounds good on paper, but I'm telling you, it's a big project because I have multiple sets that I'm building. So the regular sports chat daily videos, the pick dogs daily videos, and there's live shows. So definitely a little bit of a project back there, and some just you only have so much space. But anyways, yesterday we talked about I don't even remember, but definitely wasn't much about sports. But today we'll get a little bit back to sports with the NFL draft coming up, and kind of like before we go into, I expect there to be some action this week. So one of the things that we're hearing about Leonard Fournette is on the trade block for the Jaguars. Chris, you usually have an opinion on stuff like this. What's Leonard Fournette worth?
I mean, I'm sure it depends on who wants to offer up for him. I don't think the Giants are gonna trade down from number 4 for Leonard Fournette, but
Well, they have a
I
running
mean,
back.
they have Saquon Barkley, so there's no need to. But I'm saying there's other teams that could use a running back. I mean, would the Dolphins trade, maybe number 26 and a couple extra picks for Leonard Fournette? Would I don't know, would the Baltimore Ravens try to pick him up? I know those are two teams I had keyed in on running backs in the first round.
How about the Lions
It
with the
all depends.
third overall pick?
Sorry,
How about the Lions with the third overall pick?
I don't know if I'd reach that far
Certainly
before. I think
not past
I
them,
think this is true.
But I don't think he's worth anything more than a second rounder, to be honest. On a good day, I think that he is a great talent, but I think the issue, of course, is the injuries. And he just doesn't play that much. I think also he doesn't have the versatility.
And his attitude is an issue too. Let's not discount that. He's been a kind of a dog the last couple of years for the Jags.
Yeah, it's tough
Attitude-wise.
organization. I think when you have Tom Coughlin, then it's tough to always say, who's what. You know, he has a different, he called Strahan, crappy too, and Natron Means, who was his guy the first time around, he had a problem with him because he sat on his helmet. He used his helmet as a chair or a stool, and like that was a problem. And it's like, so Tom Coughlin, the 5 minutes early bullshit, right? It's like, I mean, I love guys that are on time. I try and always be at least on time, if not early, myself. But Tom Coughlin. So it's always tough to tell in that regard. I mean, some NFL players and some athletes in general, they do things that are more publicized than other. It's hard. It's just hard to tell. And I just think that when Kareem Hunt has a job in the NFL, it's tough to complain about anything that Leonard Fournette has done off the field. I think for me with Fournette, it's anything. It's the injuries. It's the injury bug. When he plays, he's been strong, but it's like how much is left in that tank. And, I just don't know. Are the Jags going to packet him and their pick to move up? I mean, that's a different story, right? Because they have number 9. So, how about this, Chris? number 9 and Fournette for Lions pick.
Well, I
Yeah.
might do that.
I could see them pulling the trigger on something like that. You start to wonder what they would do with Kerryon Johnson at that point, but I think it's a viable option. I mean, you got as far as the injury thing goes. I mean, maybe Fournette's trying to turn a corner. He only missed Week 17 last year, so I mean, maybe it's a sign of things that maybe he's starting to get a little bit better with his body and maybe turning the corner a little bit. But
or they didn't give him the ball as much.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, he did run for a career high in rushing yardage, but probably because he stayed on the field for 15 games.
Oh, Steve, what do you think?
He's going into his 5th year, I think, now. And to your point, Coughlin's been gone for months now, and here the Jags are looking to trade him. So, and I understand all your points on Tom Coughlin. He's not the easiest guy to please, and he holds guys.
He's not a player's coach.
No, not at all. I agree with that. But to your point, I don't see. Yeah, I mean, if the Jags want to move up, I think Leonard Fournette, part of the 9 moving up to whatever slot, whoever they target. I can see that, but definitely he's not trade Leonard Fournette and give me a first-round pick. I think second round is good compensation for him. But again, he's going into his 5th year. Injuries, running backs typically 3.5 year shelf life on average. So
yeah, he has a high price tag too. Like salary wise too. He's not going to be cheap. And here's the best case for Fournette is you put him in the Rex Burkhead spot in the Patriots, right? He's a Rex Burkhead, but way better at it, and certainly can give you a lot more downs than that. You have Sonny Michel, who's also an injury guy. I mean, he hasn't really shown it as much in the NFL, but I think that Sonny Michel also hasn't quite lived up to that number one status either, first round status as a first round pick. He kind of, I know it was late first round, but I kind of expected a little more out of him, to be honest. I thought he was going to be better than that, and especially he was taking over Chubb, who was his backfield mate at Georgia. They split time, and I think Chubb has definitely been the better back of the two. Just my own personal preference there. One guy played with Tom Brady, the other guy played with Baker Mayfield. It'd be interesting to see if it was flipped. But going through the NFL draft, there's been a lot of busts out there, and I know that some are more publicized than others. I think Jamarcus Russell, who if you've been following my site for any amount of time, you know that I hated the pick, and I just couldn't believe that they touted him to be the number 1 guy. That year I was at that point. That was one of the years that I said, I don't even think the NFL is worth watching anymore because these guys have clearly just lost the vision of the game if this guy is the best player available, And, that's where I was with that one. But there's been other guys out there, too, and not just the Ryan Lease and Tony Mandarich. And, there's been some other busts out there. But, Steve, Cowboys have had a bunch of them, but every team has. I mean, even the Patriots have had as many bust number 1s as anybody. Just because the Patriots.
For the Cowboys, Shante Carver was the number 1 pick.
Oh.
Absolute bust. Billy Cannon Jr., absolute bust. Even Bobby Carpenter. Bobby Carpenter, I think we drafted 17 overall or 18 overall.
Out of Ohio State.
Played 4 years. Out of Ohio State linebacker. Not worth first round. So the Cowboys have had multiple bombs.
To me,
Morris Claiborne, right? We talked about him.
But when you look at the grand scheme of things, it's like Claiborne actually not as bad as some of those other guys that you mentioned.
He's still playing. Yeah.
No, but he's not as bad. He's not, he's not a number 1 pick lockdown corner, but he's a serviceable guy in the NFL. He can play, you know. And I thought
But we
Newman, you know,
drafted him with that expectation that he was going to be a shutdown #1 corner.
right? No, when you
Absolutely
trade up
not
and
even
when you trade up like that, so well, you know, when we look around, Rod, who do you have kind of on that, you know, maybe doesn't get enough, you know, doesn't get enough, you're a bust, you know, like my guy, like I said him the other day, you know, was Dion. Oh God, I don't remember this, right? Dion
Jordan.
Johnson. Dion Johnson. Dion Jordan.
Jordan.
Oh God. I mean, number 3 overall. Rod, who do you think when you think bust? You know, who's your Blake Bortles? Could it be Blake Bortles? I mean, I hated the Bortles pick. I mean, I was like, here's a guy that needs another year. You know, I was like, whew. Rod looks frozen. We'll get back to Rod. Chris.
How about Andre Bruce?
Who?
Andre Bruce.
Oh, Andre Bruce, definitely from the Falcons. He's definitely up there. You know, how about a guy like Alex Smith? You know, number 1 overall. You know, Aaron Rodgers kind of sitting there and sitting there and sitting there and sitting there.
Right.
I don't think he was a bust. I just wanted another guy that I just don't think lived up to. He's kind of in that Maurice Claiborne category.
Yeah.
I think Blaine Gabbert's a guy that, you know, was just totally overrated, and Kyle Bowler. I think these are 2 guys that kind of in the same category where, you know, they might rate out well at a combine, but to me, this is where, you know, why the Ravens and the Patriots have been good is that they generally don't take guys like that. And the Bengals, too, had a run where they made the playoffs longer than anybody. You know, outside of the last year or two, the Bengals made the playoffs. They had the longest run of anybody of being the playoff team. And, you know, it's because they always take guys we heard of, you know, football players as opposed to guys that are combine guys. You know, so, Chris, who are some others that you come to pop off the top of your head here?
For me, when I first really started watching college football growing up, and it was around the early to mid 2000s, and I remember the 2006 draft where you had Vince Young and Matt Leinart both go in the top 10. I know Matt Leinart had won a Heisman, but it was still, you look at how far they had fallen within maybe 5 years of being drafted, and it was just remarkable. I mean, you look at other guys that were taken in that draft. I mean, even Jay Cutler had a longer career than Matt Leinart, and Vince Young, Haloti Ngata, Antonio Cromartie, taken in later parts of the first round. But those 2 will always stand out for me, just being both in the top 10.
It's a good one. How about Todd Marinovich?
Absolutely, you know, super QB or whatever, you know.
Robo QB.
Yeah, Robo QB. He definitely fizzled out. And I say Dave Brown, too. I mean, the Giants gave up a first-round pick for him, supplemental draft. He kind of flew under the radar because he was supplemental. But he was a first-round pick, any way you slice it. And you give up your first-round pick to take a guy. Pretty much counts as a first-round pick in my book. I think, you know, when you head over to the wide receivers, it's a pretty bustable position. You know, Darius Hayward-Bay is a guy that kind of jumps right off the page at you. And, you know, there's been a few others, too. You know, Charles Rogers, who you know, he passed away recently. Was fantastic, you know, his senior year of college, but he never, you know, never hit it. And then, you know, there's
Johnny Manziel, recently, Johnny Man. Manziel.
Oh yeah, Johnny
Brian Lee.
Manziel. Definitely.
Brian Lee. What was it? 16 touchdowns and like 30 something interceptions, something like that. Tim Couch.
Good one,
Tim Couch.
Andre Ware.
Andre
Yeah,
Ware.
Andre Ware.
David Klingler. And Achilles Smith.
Achilles.
Those guys kind of go hand in hand. So we've seen the Bengals botch picks. So I don't know. Maybe we should just go through the teams and say, you know, who off the top of your head is the worst pick they ever made. You know,
Who's got the most botched NFL pick draft?
Well, I think the Patriots have the most. I think when you look back, and I think the Patriot fans will admit this. This is how you win. This is how you win 6 Super Bowls, play for 9 or 10, and still have a losing overall record to the Miami Dolphins. This is the way the Patriots have drafted in the pre-Belichick era. Believe me, the Chuck Fairbanks era not as glamorous as this, you know. And there's been a few other ones too. I mean, the Patriots. I wonder, they might be the team that's drafted. The reason why I mention them so often is they might be the team that's drafted number 1 overall more than anybody. I believe that they have been. So that's a good question. Who is drafted number 1? What teams?
I'll throw another bust out there. The New York Jets, Blair Thomas, running back out of Penn State.
So the Colts. Oh yeah. Oh, definitely. But that whole draft was a bust draft. Keith McCants, Jared Bunch was taken by the Giants. You know, and of course the kicker of that one is as all these teams are drafting busts and the Giant fans are drafting Jared Bunch when they desperately need a quarterback at that point. Brett Favre is drafted, you know, in the 2nd round by the Falcons. It was like Giant fans were they were livid.
Yeah.
Livid.
Colts. The Colts have the most.
The Colts and the Rams.
Oh. How many?
7 apiece.
7?
Yeah. New England's only had 4, actually.
Wow. But they were probably all in a bunch.
71, 82, 84, and 93.
Yeah. Kenneth Sims was one of them. So let's look at. All right, this is good. Let's look at the number 1 overall draft picks. We'll start in. I was going to start in 1970, but we'll start in 1969, and it was O.J. Simpson. Steve, first overall worthy.
Yeah, I mean, as a football player, you know, he was the juice. He's in the Hall of Fame.
I'd say definitely number 1.
94 on. You know,
yeah. No, I'm just saying, as a player, he was the NFL MVP, Hall of Famer. You know, he was the Heisman winner, 2000, first one over 2,000 in a season, and a 14-game season. He also, you know, I mean, he basically carried that team on his back. They figured out, Buffalo figured out a strategy, and I say this all the time. You know, it's like, you know, you figure out something that works, you just run it over and over and over again until somebody can stop it. Well, Buffalo figured out that if they, instead of letting Joe Ferguson throw the ball down the field, that they just hand the ball to O.J. Simpson every single play, that they have a better chance of winning. And it worked. You know, pretty much it worked. You know, they lost a few games, you know, but they made the playoffs, and O.J. was, I mean, the MVP that year. So I'd have to say O.J., yes.
Worthy.
Yes, worthy. We move into 1970, and here's a guy that, I mean, this guy had a hell of a career. But number 1 overall, Terry Bradshaw. Okay? 4 Super Bowls. I mean, can't argue with that, right? Joe Montana type numbers. You know, better than Montana. Hall of Famer. Only 3 Pro Bowls for Terry Bradshaw in that entire career, because Terry Bradshaw was one of the more up and down guys that has ever played. Terry Bradshaw was demoted to 3rd string as you know, from being the starter during his career while the Steelers were winning. You know, Joe Gilliam got some action in there. People wanted Hanratty.
Yep.
You know, he also had In hindsight, when you look at the supporting cast that Terry Bradshaw had, he had the killer offensive line. He probably had, if not the best, the second best center. Dwight Stevenson and Mike Webster to me are in that conversation of the best centers of all time, right? So he had that. He had arguably the best defensive line and linebacking core, and maybe even secondary. Terry Bradshaw might have played on the greatest team of all time. I think the '78 Steelers, to me, when people say what is the best team you've ever seen, to me it's the '78 Steelers. Was the best team I ever saw. I think the team that won the Immaculate Reception game against the Raiders that lost to Miami the next week was a very good team, and kind of you saw that this was going to be a great team. But when you look at that team with Lynn Swann and John Stallworth, Terry Bradshaw, Mean Joe Green, Elsie Greenwood, the NFL had never seen a front four like that before, or a linebackers like the running backs they didn't want to go, like Jack Lambert, they didn't want to go up the middle on him, or Jack Ham. This guy's the first real sideline to sideline guy. This textbook tacklers. And Mel Blount was an assassin over the middle. So I think Bradshaw. I think you take you take the 4 Super Bowls and 2 Super Bowl MVPs, and you say, you're probably not going to do a hell of a lot better than that.
Worthy.
I'd have to say worthy, but I think we'd have to look at the rest of the draft class. So we go to 71, and here's a guy. Okay, here's the Patriots. Jim Plunkett, who was horrible with the Patriots, right? Horrible. He was good later in his career with the Raiders. He kind of was one of those guys that got redemption late in his career. Kind of like Rich Gannon. Right, kind of like Rich Gannon, where he wasn't so good early in his career, and then late in his career, he kind of got really good. Maybe a better version of Rich Gannon. I'd have to say that even though Plunkett's got the 2 Super Bowls and the Super Bowl MVP, never made the Pro Bowl one time in his entire career. I don't know if he was worthy of number 1 overall. I think on that Raiders team that he had, give me Marcus Allen in that form, and I probably could dump the ball to him a couple times too. He also had Tim Brown. I think at the end of his career, he had him, and he had a pretty damn good defense. Also, he had Lester Hayes and Mark Haynes as his corners. The one year that they won the Super Bowl that he didn't get the MVP, it was Lester Hayes was the MVP in the Philadelphia-Oakland Super Bowl. I remember that specifically. Those of you that never saw Lester Hayes and Mark Haynes, you missed something. Like any of today's corners that they talk about, and this Gilmore or anything, you've never seen anything. I can assure you. Mark Haynes was another guy drafted by the Patriots.
Yeah, Mike Haynes, not Mark.
Yeah, Mike Haynes and Lester Hayes.
Yeah. But they had Ted Hendricks too, who was a beast.
The story. Lyle Alzado.
Well, Matt Millen was, damn good linebacker for the Raiders. I would say no, not worthy of overall number.
Yeah, I failed to mention Mean Joe Green when I talked about the Steelers. That was a big miss.
Good. He was pretty good.
Yeah.
It's either Plunkett or Archie Manning who went at number 2 in that draft. So
Archie Manning, I thought, was another guy that was seriously overrated in his NFL career.
I do too.
He was one of those guys that was always seen like, he just played on bad teams or whatever. It's like they were bad because you were on there, because you were the quarterback. He's one of those guys that's kind of like he's way seen, and he always was, even back then. He was always seen as way better than he ever was. To me, I never really saw it. Maybe because his teams were so bad. And also, we didn't get to watch all of the games back then. Things were different, on TV. So maybe we didn't see the great Archie Manning. But to me, you got to win games. Got it back into the Bills, and it's the Wolf Patulski pick.
Next.
Notre Dame defensive end. The next year was another guy who ended up on the Raiders, and I I don't think this guy's number one overall worthy, but definitely a great player, was John Matuzak. He won the 2 Super Bowl championships with the Raiders. He was not on the second Plunkett team, but he was on the John Madden Super Bowl 11 team, which was also a very, very good team. Those Madden Raider teams, when Madden left the Raiders as the coach, they were the winningest organization in the NFL. Like when he left, he had the best like Belichick might have the most wins or whatever, but John Madden has the best winning percentage of any coach. He was easily, like, when it came to like absolute X's and O's and the guy who was the best coach out there, John Madden was easily the best coach there's ever. He didn't coach as long as some of these guys, so he won't show up in those streaks that we talked about or those unbreakable records or anything like that. But his winning percentage certainly puts him right there. So John Matuzak with the John Madden team, with Ken Stabler as the quarterback, is kind of a perfect fit there. But he didn't start there. He started in Houston on the Oilers, and that's where he was drafted 1 overall. And he was not really that good there. I think he's a great player, one of my favorite players, but certainly not a number 1 overall player because he didn't have the from day one impact. I think we're before Chris and Rod's time here, maybe a little bit. Then, another big guy. So another big guy went the next year. The 2s was super tall. He was the first really tall player in the NFL. The next guy, so the next year they went tall again. Ed Too Tall Jones to the Cowboys. Number 1 overall, Steve?
I'm biased about Ed Too Tall. I would say yes. Ed Too Tall had a real good career. Super Bowl champ. And when they beat the Broncos, I'm gonna, I think Ed at least played 10 years, right? And he was a dominant force for the Cowboys and a major contributor to championship team. So yeah, I'm gonna say yeah.
He played on a lot of great teams, and he was one of those guys that when you talk about like Pat Summerall games that he called, he loved Too Tall. Loved him.
What?
Too Tall was, I don't know if he's number 1 overall, but he definitely was up there. So Steve Bartkowski went the next year at number 1 overall. I have to say that I don't think he's a worthy number 1 overall pick. This is 1975. I remember the pick. This is how old I am. I remember this pick. I remember them making the pick, and I still, I don't love the pick then. I think he fits in that Jared Goff category, and I don't even think he made it as good as Goff. Bartkowski's claim to fame is that he was actually, while Staubach was the Hail Mary guy, Bartkowski's play was Big Ben, and it was similar to Hail Mary. And he was really good at it. He could drop it right in there. But as far as winning on a consistent basis, didn't really happen for him. We move on. Leroy Selman in 76 for the Bucs. So this was the year of the expansion draft when the Bucs and Seahawks came into the league. They flipped the coin and the Bucs got the number 1 overall pick. And they took Leroy Selman. I got to say that if you can get a guy like Leroy Selman and stick him in your defensive line for the next 15 years, you should win a lot more games than the Bucs did. And I think Leroy Selman, he's one of those guys that you could say, well, Plunkett had his chance with the Raiders late in his career, whatever. Selman never had those chances. But if he did, he could have been on the and he still might be. I don't know. I don't follow all those all-time teams. But I'd imagine he's one of those all-time great players in the NFL, like in the top 100 players of all time or the top 20 defensive ends of all time. I would say Leroy Selman is somewhere in the list and probably in the top 10. This is back when Oklahoma played defense. His brother Dewey Selman as well. But Leroy is definitely the better of the two. Steve, any qualms with Leroy Selman, one of the greatest defensive ends to ever play the game?
I'm as old as you are. Leroy Selman was outstanding, and it's kind of funny because I think the Bucs had an 0-26 at some point. I think it's the NFL record. But the Tampa Bay Bucs got to the championship game, against the Rams. So the Rams went to the Super Bowl against the Steelers. So, obviously Leroy Selman was instrumental on the defensive side. Absolute bona fide, worthy number one overall.
So Selman went to
Number
the
one.
Pro Bowl 6 years in a row, which is pretty
Yeah.
good. That shows that you don't get injured, shows that you show up. And that's back when the Pro Bowl really meant something. So the next year was one of the worst, I would say one of those swing and miss picks in the NFL draft, and one of those ones where Michael Jordan is still on the board. And this was Ricky Bell being taken number one overall by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The number two pick, so the number two pick was by Seattle, because once again it was the year that it was when they did the expansion back then. The expansion teams got 2 years in a row, got the first two picks, and they flipped the coin for it. And Tampa Bay won the coin toss and took Ricky Bell. The Cowboys traded and got that pick from Seattle. They took Tony Dorsett, was the pick that they took. That's right after him. And
That's right.
I would say that that's that's the one that you'd love to have back. Ricky Bell. Ricky Bell was he wasn't awful, but he wasn't good in the NFL. Ricky Bell was out of USC, and back then USC was running back U. They had OJ, they had Anthony Davis, and then it was Ricky Bell, and it was like
Charles White.
Et cetera. They had a whole run of running backs, and they were considered running back U. The next year, one of my all-time favorite players, the guy who I still think doesn't get enough credit, Earl Campbell, taken number one out of Texas. Chris and Rod, we getting into your range here with these guys? Starting to? All right. The Tyler Rose, Earl Campbell. Steve, any problems with Earl Campbell?
Absolutely not. Earl Campbell was so great, and it's unfortunate because the toll football took on him. He's literally in a wheelchair. He's been,
he left it all on the field. He left it
all on the field.
He was
outstanding.
He played on an Oilers team that drafted number one overall. They made it to the championship like 3 years in a row and lost. Or two. They made it two. They made it back-to-back years, and it was against the Steelers. Those seven Steeler teams that were like, though we just talked about as some of the greatest teams of all time. Those were the teams that they lost to, in those games, and they were close. And all they had was Earl Campbell. The wide receivers were like Ken Burrow was their big wide receiver. I mean, these are guys you heard of. Dan Pastorini was the quarterback.
Yeah, Mike Renfro. We talked about it. I think. The Oilers got jobbed in one of those championship games where Mike Renfro was in the back of the end zone and he was in, and the referee called him out, and that was Houston, as close as they were going to get to beating the Steelers, but the call went against them. But Earl Campbell, I highly recommend anybody go look up highlights of Earl Campbell from college and the pros. The guy is just,
he's like
fantastic.
They changed the Earl Campbell. They used to rip the uniform right off him, and we're not talking tearaway jerseys either. And he would still keep going. Him and Herschel Walker are two of the toughest runners you'll ever see. Larry Zonka probably in that thing too.
I agree.
Joe Green gets standing ovations whenever he appears. Joe Green is one of the greatest there's ever been. I'd say an interior defensive lineman. He's on the list. He's definitely on, that Steelers team, in general, like that spot next to Joe Green where Arrowhead Holmes played and then Steve Fournette played, it was kind of like it didn't really matter because Joe Green took up so much, and then, it made everybody better. Jack Lambert was better because he played behind Joe Green. I mean, I'm not saying Lambert would have been a slouch somewhere else. I'm just saying he wouldn't have been as good if he wasn't behind Joe Green. And I think a lot of the Steelers linebackers will say the same thing. Andy Russell will probably say the same thing. Another great tackler. Keep moving on. And Tom Cousineau was taken by the Buffalo Bills in 1979. Ouch. Steve?
Next. Not worthy.
Well, I think this one is actually worthy of. Let's look at the 1979 NFL draft and see exactly what happened here. Tom Cousineau, and I remember the pick, and it was one of those ones where it was like at the time it was seen as suspect, right? So if
He
you
was an
really,
All-American at Ohio State. He was a good college linebacker,
but
of course, to be.
if you go down the list here, this was not a great draft. You know, so there's a few guys in here that were difference makers. You know, definitely as you go down. But when you look at this first round, there's this. It's pretty much one of those years where it was a bust first round. So Tom Cousineau was first. Mike Bell was taken by the Chiefs second, and Jack Thompson, the throwing Samoan, another Bengal quarterback that we kind of can add to this mix of
Yeah.
top 5 Bengal quarterback, busts of all time. Somehow Jack Thompson, the throwing Samoan, gets a pass on those, right? It's like, man, Jack Thompson throwing. You guys know Jack Thompson, Chris and Rod, the throwing Samoan.
Who?
Exactly.
No.
The Bengals took him. I'm sure Kuiper had him high on his board too. Jack Thompson.
I would have been 3 years old.
He's actually worse than the Klingler pick. If you go back, and the Achilles Smith, he's worse than both of those picks. There. So the Bears took Dan Hampton. The Bears took Dan Hampton at number 4. The Bills took Jerry Butler, who wasn't bad. Barry Krause was taken next by the Colts. Then Phil Simms, Otis Anderson by the Cardinals, Al Harris by the Bears, who was actually really good. Not a guy that you hear a lot about, but certainly one of the better players out there. I think Al Harris might have gotten into trouble. Was one of those guys that got into trouble. Pretty sure he was. But this draft was so bad that the Saints, with the 11th overall pick, took Russell Erxleben, who was a punter kicker. And I'll tell you, he was a bust too. Taking that high. So Al Harris, he was the 9th pick, 79 to 84, and then he came back in 86 to 88. He sat out the 85 season. This is what happened. He sat out the 85 season. He had a contract dispute. And he missed the Super Bowl year. That was the year that he missed.
Yeah.
But anyways, that draft was just not a good draft. Any way you slice it. Kellen Winslow was probably the gem of that draft. If you go back and say
Joe Montana taken in the 3rd round at 2.
Joe Cool went in that draft, right?
Went in the 3rd round. End of the 3rd round.
All right. Yep, Joe Montana, 82nd overall. There's the Cowboys with Doug Cosby. But when you go up and down this draft, there's not a lot of guys here like that ended up being, superstars in the NFL. There's Tony Nathan, who was good, Joe Bostic, Manu Tuiasosopo, who was pretty decent. But this is not like a Peyton Manning draft,
Kellen Winslow was probably the best player in the first round.
In the first round, and then Montana, of course, he's the guy that came through.
Absolutely.
All right, we go to the next year, the post-Tom Cousineau era. And let's see what happened when they bounced back from that. Billy Sims, here's a guy that I know this is always disputed because I always have him near the very top of my list of all-time running backs. But he had a very, very short career. Steve, what do you think of Billy Sims?
He's absolutely worthy of the number 1 pick.
Yeah, I think so.
I know he had a short career, but he was really, really good.
Not in
very
the NFL
productive.
Hall of Fame.
Yeah, that's interesting. How many years did he play?
3, looks like. No.
That's it? No, couldn't be.
Yeah. 80, 81, and 82, he was in the Pro Bowl, and I believe he was by 84, he was out of football. Wow. So here's how good Billy Sims was. The Lions, they picked number 1 overall in 1980. The year of the catch. The year of the catch by the 49ers against the Cowboys. the 49ers had beaten the Lions on a last-second field goal to get to that game. A Ray Wershing field goal, last second to beat as time expired to beat the Lions, and the Lions had nothing. I mean, they were exactly the Lions. They had Billy Sims, and that was it. It was kind of that OJ strategy, where it was giving the ball on every single play. And that's what they did. The next was, I think, a guy who not worthy of the number one overall, George Rogers. I did not think that he was worthy of the Heisman Trophy, and I certainly don't think he was worthy of the number one overall pick. Steve?
Nah, I agree. I mean, he had a decent NFL career, but yeah, I wouldn't say worthy of number one overall.
Next.
George Rogers, South Carolina running back, won the Heisman.
Next is
we're moving on up. I hit 5.
Next is my favorite. Next is my favorite number one overall pick, and that's Kenneth Sims out of Texas for the Patriots. Right? Could be if you look back at the all-time NFL draft bust, he could be number one overall. John Elway,
definitely not worth it.
No. John Elway next year, yes?
Yeah.
Hey, somebody I know. Worthy. He's definitely worthy of number one.
I think he's worthy of a number one. I think that it was a tough. I think it was a tough class, and I think if they had it back, he was taken by the Colts, John Elway, and he refused to play in Baltimore.
Yeah.
But I would say Hall of Fame, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 Pro Bowls, Super Bowl MVP, 2-time Super Bowl champion, and NFL MVP. It's a pretty good resume there. Not quite Bradshaw. So here we go to 1984, and this was an interesting thing. This was Irving Fryer, another Patriots number one overall pick. I think Fryer was a good player, but he's not even a Hall of Famer.
Nope.
I really think that draft, and it's like I'm not looking at it, but I think any of those Nebraska offensive linemen would have been a good. They had Dave Remington was on that team, the center, and it's like if there's ever a center that was going to go number one, I thought Dave Remington was the guy. Also, Dean Steinkuhler was on that Nebraska team. Mike Rozier was the Heisman Trophy winner on that team. Go to the next year, and this is going to be a tough one to argue with. And this is Bruce Smith. I think you get a defensive end that's could be top. Definitely, he's one of the top 5 all-time guys.
Hall of Fame.
Chris?
Peace.
Chris, any issue with Bruce Smith? You like the Kenneth Sims pick better than that one?
I was waiting for the words Oklahoma linebacker to come out. No, I have no issue with Bruce Smith. Bona fide Hall of Famer for sure.
I mean, when you look at Bruce Smith and you look at even the years that he made the Pro Bowl. So from 87 to 98, he made the Pro Bowl every year except for one. That means that he stayed healthy, too, throughout his entire career. Next year, number one overall was Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and that was Bo Jackson. Went on and played.
And that's baseball. An interesting one. Obviously, Bo Jackson would have been worthy of the number one pick, but he played baseball and football, and so if you go by his NFL career, no, but he's Bo Jackson, the greatest athlete, maybe to show up on a baseball and football field. You know what I mean? So that's an interesting one.
Yep. And by the way, Rod and I are going to start covering horse racing. I don't know if we're going to do it tomorrow or next weekend. It's up to him. Talk about it after the show. Rod and I will start doing the horse racing. I don't think we're going to stay on the air, for hours and hours and hours. I think we'll just do like a show and give out some picks and then maybe come back and give out some more picks. But I don't want to sit there for hours and hours. It's like we're not going to take like a show where we've always talked about football and basketball and baseball and the main sports and then turn it into a horse racing show. I don't think. Because then what will happen is, people expect us to continue to do that after sports are back, and I'm not going to. I can promise you. We might have horse racing guys and horse racing shows and stuff like that. And I do like horse racing, but I'm going
might
to.
talk
The
about
plans
the
are I'm going to be doing
big
at least
pictures,
three live shows, including this one. I'm going to be doing the SK show, the Spread Knowledge show that I did up until the stoppage. This show, and then another show at 5:30 p.m. Eastern time. With it's yet to be determined. The format is picked out, but who I'm with and all that other stuff. I don't know. It's one of those shows where I can have a million guests, but it's going to be really, really fast paced. Everyone's going to like it, I promise. Vinny Testaverde went the next year. Testaverde had come off, and I have to say, as a Miami fan, I don't think this guy was worthy of the number one overall because he had shown in the big games that he was bad. It wasn't just the Penn State game where he threw 6 interceptions. He threw 5 interceptions the previous year against Tennessee in the game that was for the national championship for Miami as well. So Testaverde had lost back-to-back national championship games.
Yeah.
Was he the best guy available? I'm not really sure.
Not for me.
The next year was the Andre Bruce pick.
Bust.
Next.
Troy Aikman, number one overall.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yes.
Yep, 3-time Super Bowl champion. I think the goal of the NFL team is to win the Super Bowl. All the Pro Bowls, all that other stuff. If you have a guy that was a key piece in winning you the Super Bowl, I'd say Troy Aikman's there. I don't put Troy Aikman in the top quarterback of all time discussion. I don't think anybody does, but he does have 3 rings, and he certainly didn't lose those games for them.
Yeah.
Next year was Jeff George. So here's a guy, one of the biggest busts at every level, at the college and NFL level. He was always a high potential guy and never did anything with it. And once again, it was the Colts picking number one overall. The next year,
No.
So here's a guy with 3 Super Bowl rings, Russell Maryland. I really don't think he's worthy of that high of a pick.
No.
He played. He did play.
Yeah, he contributed, but no one.
He was
Not even close.
a solid contributor, but kind of like a guy who's, he's a guy who plays a 6-7 year NFL career with a good team, solidly contributes. Not a guy that sat on the bench the whole time. Solidly contributed, but he's not a Hall of Famer or anything. He's kind of just a guy. Russell Maryland he played in college, arguably the greatest run defense of all time. The run defense that he played on at Miami allowed less than 10 yards per game rushing. So it was super attractive, and that's why the Cowboys fell into it. Of course, Jesse Armstead, they had some savage linebackers on that team. They had the most head-hunting linebackers. That was the year. So that was the year that. We're getting into that David Klingler years, right? And so to tell you how good that Miami defense was, Houston was seen as the unstoppable run and shoot offense that could put up millions of points every game. And it's just so happened they had Miami on the schedule as the second or third game of the season. They ran the run and shoot, and on the third play of the game, Jesse Armstead, who was a linebacker on Miami, was covering Houston's fastest wide receiver, step for step down the sideline. And the announcer on ESPN said, "Wait a minute, he's being covered by a linebacker? This is going to be a long night." It's they're in some big trouble here. And that's just how great that defense was. And that was, when we talked about the winning streaks and stuff, that team won 34 games in a row. So, there was a lot to like about Russell Maryland. Steve Entman was the next year, and he was a guy who I think was worthy of the pick, but was a bust because of injuries. Steve?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, Edmund had all the potential in the world, but no, I mean, absolutely not in retrospect. No.
All right, because we're getting into some real cream puffs here. So Drew Bledsoe went number one overall in '93. I believe there was another quarterback in that draft too, right? That was kind of like you take Bledsoe or him.
I'm sure there was.
Take a look.
I think.
We'll take a quick look at this 93 draft and see how Bledsoe ends up. Oh, yeah. It absolutely was. It was Rick Myrer was the other quarterback.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so it was Drew Bledsoe, Rick Myrer, Garrison Hurst, Marvin Jones. This was another really bad draft. John Copeland, Eric Curry, Curtis Conway, Willie Rofe. This is the year that the Giants forfeited their number one, which would have been number 9 overall, and took Dave Brown. So when you look at the bust, I don't know why he's always excused, but he is number 9 overall. In the first round, in my book. I'm never gonna. I'll just let them slide on it. You're never gonna hear that come out of my mouth, right? It's like. Yeah, I'll just let the Giants slide that they took him. But if you look at this whole draft, it's bad. Everett, Tom Carter, Ernest Dye, Lester Holmes, Irv Smith, Robert Smith, Darian Gooden, Deion Figures, Leonard Renfro, O.J. McDuffie, Dana Stubblefield, Todd Kelly, Thomas Smith, George Teague, who was probably, that's the first round of that draft. That's how bad it is. So Bledsoe, I think when you look at the draft, I would say, go back and say, yeah, he is. He is the number 1 overall guy. All right. Dan Wilkinson the next year at Ohio State in 94. To the Bengals.
Nope.
Bust-O-Rama.
Bust-O-Rama, yeah.
The next year, the Bengals, one bust wasn't enough for them. They drafted well enough to get they played well enough to get the number 1 overall again. And it was Penn State running back, Kajina Carter. I still hold this against Penn State, right? Blair Thomas, Kajina Carter. I said the same thing when they drafted Saquon Barkley, 25 years later. So that was another bad draft, though, that 95 draft. That was the draft. That was the Brett Favre draft, I believe, was that one.
Yep.
So then 96 was Keyshawn Johnson at USC. Super Bowl champion with the Bucks. Only 3 Pro Bowls for Keyshawn. I don't know if he's a number 1 overall.
No. I wouldn't say number 1 overall either.
The next year
was in that.
So here's where you go offensive tackle, and you get a guy that is the number 1 overall, and that's Orlando Pace the next year for the Rams. Easily one of the top offensive linemen ever. The next year, this is a gimme, Peyton Manning. Chris, you like that pick?
Yeah, I think so.
The next year, Tim Couch.
There's the Bust-O-Rama. Bust-O-Rama!
And the next year, though, the Browns followed it up, so they had back-to-back number 1 overalls. They followed out with another Penn State bust. Okay, so I think Penn State is starting to mount here when we start to look at who the number 1 busts are.
I was just gonna say.
And you look at Courtney Brown and you say, how in the hell did this happen? So now we're into 2000. So, man, maybe this should have been a 2-part show. Definitely getting along. So, let's see. The 2000 NFL draft went Courtney Brown, LeVar Arrington, Chris Samuels, Peter Warwick, Jamal Lewis, Corey Simon, Thomas Jones, Plexico Burris.
Yeah.
Tough crowd. The next year, Michael Vick, worthy of the number 1 overall pick. He was easily the best player in that draft.
Well, he shot himself in the foot.
Yeah, but he was easily the most talented guy. He had gotten to the national championship game against Florida State with Virginia Tech, which was unheard of at the time.
Yeah.
The next year. So the next year was David Carr.
Next.
David Carr, in his notes here, right? He's considered a Super Bowl champion because didn't he play for the Giants when they beat the Patriots?
Right.
He backed up Eli Manning in the 2011.
Yeah, and he has that Super Bowl champion on his resume. Still don't think we call him a number one overall pick. The next was Carson Palmer. Everyone knows I hated this pick. I hated him winning the Heisman Trophy. I hated all those things. I don't think he was worthy of the number one overall. It's been a long time, so why let it go now? Steve, what do you think?
I agree. No, I agree.
Chris, 2000 NFL draft. Anything pop
Yeah,
off your
yeah,
head?
yeah.
Because
I
this
don't think
was
he
the
was.
Charles Rogers draft, but Andre Johnson was the best player
Yeah,
to me. This
yeah.
was
I
the
would
Terrence
know to
Newman
me.
draft, Byron Leftwich, uh, an Oklahoma defensive tackle, Kevin Williams, he went off the board quickly. Terrell Suggs was in this draft. Marcus Trufant was in this draft. So Jerome McDougal was another bust, but Troy Polamalu went at 16. There was a lot of good players in this draft, man. A lot of good ones. Jeff Fain played a long time. Willis McGahee was in this draft. Dallas Clark was in this draft. Larry Johnson was in this draft. And
Good players.
yeah, I'm not saying that Charles Tillman was in this draft. I'm not saying that these are like the all-time best draft, but I'm saying that when you have this many names in there that lasted that long, I mean, Rex Grossman went in this draft, 22nd overall. Keep moving. It's Eli Manning was traded on draft day. This was another one of those things. It's like this was where Archie Manning started really overstepping his bounds. I don't know. 2 Super Bowls and nothing else. It's kind of like, would you take them? Would you take it? I think if I, as a Dolphin fan, I would. You know, to just take 2 Super Bowls and have absolutely nothing else to go with it.
Sure.
Chris,
I think anybody would sign up for that to get 2 Super Bowls.
I think it would have been nice if it was like an 8-year career with 2 Super Bowls instead of like the rest of it. Keep going. Go to Alex Smith, the guy that I talked about earlier. Never understood the pick and still don't understand it today.
Nope.
Mario Williams. So here was the year that Mario Williams went ahead of Reggie Bush. I think Mario Williams was the better player. I'm going to stick with it. I think he was worthy. I don't think he's a Hall of Famer, but I think he was worthy of being 1 overall.
Oh, well, yeah.
What do you guys think?
I think Mario Williams had a real good career. I think Reggie Bush didn't live up to his college resume. So I agree with that. I think Williams had a better NFL career.
So Vince Young went third there. DeBrickashaw Ferguson, A.J. Hawk, Vernon Davis, Michael Huff, Dante Whitner, Ernie Sims, Matt Leinart, Jay Cutler. This was the draft that Chris was talking about. Jay Cutler was there. Nata went next to the Ravens. We talked about that the other day. Cameron Wimbley, who actually was a great player for the Browns and then later for the Raiders. This guy, when I used to write up the games at Sports Chat and used to do the write-ups like Chris does and all the great writers, this was a guy like my go-to guy for the write-ups. It was just like, how many tackles does Cameron Wimbley have right now? It's got about 6 million. This is one of those guys that in the NFL that this was the Bob Carpenter draft for the Cowboys, but Cameron Wimbley is one of those guys. If you look at his career numbers, my guess is he's averaged double-digit tackles a game. I mean, that's how good he was. Let's see. He had all right, so maybe not. Maybe not. All right. Maybe I overestimated him. thought he was better than those numbers. But when you look at his pure numbers, not as good as I thought. I know. Uh-oh. That sucks. Oh, man, I lost my... There we go. That was a tough moment there. All right, we'll move on quickly because these are the guys we should know. So next was Jamarcus Russell. Right, like that one. Then after that,
Holy, he was the best.
So
Great pick.
Here was a pick that I didn't like, and I'll stick with it. I'll stick to my guns. It was a weak draft. Jake Long for the Dolphins. Hated the pick at the time. Still, I thought he was better than I thought he was going to be, but still number 1 overall. You got to do better than that. Next, Matthew Stafford. Yeah. So Matthew Stafford was drafted in 2009. Here we are in 2020, so he's 10 years in. I think the body of work. I thought Matthew Stafford was overrated coming out of college. He's got 1 Pro Bowl in his entire career. He's the highest paid quarterback in the NFL.
Yep. Overrated.
Sam Bradford.
No.
Cam Newton.
Manning.
I'd say yes. In that draft, yes.
Yeah.
Andrew Luck.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Here's a tough one. Eric Fisher, 2013. I mean, they won.
Still playing, isn't he?
Yeah, but he's got 1 Pro Bowl in 7 years and the Super Bowl, and that's it. He also had the big penalty that knocked him out of the Super Bowl. I'd say no for number 1 overall. Next year, Jadeveon Clowney, yes. Jameis Winston.
Boo.
Oh, and then your buddies next. Golf.
Yep.
Everybody loves golf.
I think we know on this one.
Yeah, for some reason, I keep losing my list.
I think the last 5 are going to be all busteroo. Jameis Winston, Jared Goff, Myles Garrett, Baker Mayfield, Kyler Murray. Yeah.
Well, Kyler Murray, I'm going to say yes.
Well, you can't say him yet. He's still too early. It's only 1 year.
But I'm going to say after last season, yes.
Yeah, pretty good year. Let's see how he does this year.
Yeah, I would say Myles Garrett, yes, and I would also say Kyler Murray. The rest of them, I would say no, especially Goff.
Yeah, Baker Mayfield, no. Golf, no.
I don't like Goff, and I also don't like all the choices. So, anyways, our show ran about 6 miles long today. I think we even lost some of our guys, but anyways, thanks everyone for joining us. Rod and I are going to be doing horse racing. I don't know when we're starting, but probably in the next. I don't know if Rod, when are we starting? It's up to you. Tomorrow or next week?
Probably next week, like Wednesday, Thursday, when actual good tracks are going. Okay. The only ones, like Monday, is Will Rogers. I don't know if we want to be playing Will Rogers.
Oklahoma. Some Oklahoma horse racing.
Yeah. I'm going to look at it because I like looking at it, but your picks, it's a tough track.
What's the safest bet in the NFL draft? Who's the safest bet?
The number 1 pick. What's his name? Burrows goes 1. Safest bet. What is it? Minus 400?
No. Oh, the safest bet. I think he's meaning who's the safest bet as a player.
I think he's it could be either way.
Steve,
That's going to produce.
who's your safest bet?
It's a good question. I'll go with Lionel Simmons or Isaiah Simmons. Linebacker Clemson. I think this guy's going to be all world.
Chris, who's your safest bet in the NFL draft?
Steve took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to say Isaiah Simmons as well.
Rod?
I'm gonna say Jordan Love is going to be the safest bet. A little surprise, safest bet. I think
I'm gonna stick to my guns that I said. The same guy I picked 3 years ago. I'm gonna stick to the same guy, Jerry Jeudy, easily the best player in this draft. I said it 3 years ago when he signed at Alabama that he would be the best player in his draft class, and I will say it once again. He's the best player in this draft. He's a Hall of Famer. I'm gonna say it right now. He's easily the best player in this draft. The only thing that can hold him back is if he goes to a team that can't get him the football, like the Jaguars or something. Which even then,
maybe if you use the right key.
Even then, I also think Jeff Okudah is probably not a bad pick either. I like guys that like Eli Apple was a pass interference waiting to happen.
Maybe if you use the right key.
I think to me Eli Apple was always like a pass interference guy. While Jeff Okudah is the opposite. I don't think he's had a penalty called on him in 2 years.
I'll throw Derek Brown out there too. Defensive lineman from Auburn, I think.
But those defensive linemen, so he's up there. I'll stick with Jerry Jeudy. He's the sure thing. Slam dunk. All right, we'll see you guys tomorrow. It's just me tomorrow. Monday, Mitch. So you guys get a couple days. You guys get a couple days off. I'll see all you guys on Tuesday, but I'll be back tomorrow for Mondays with Mitch. Those of you that follow me on Facebook, you guys know I did a video yesterday about pineapple. So don't miss them. Got it. See what you missed if you're not my Facebook friend? You missed a really good one on planting pineapples. It's very exciting.
Cool.
Yeah. All right. Have a great day, everyone.
It was pretty good. Jealous.